Dog cries, while chained in the rain. What the man did next was unbelievable. Indus River Valley, late afternoon. Rain had been falling for hours, not gentle but steady, the kind that pooled in shallow ruts, sank into cracked clay, and left corrugated tin roofs groaning under the weight. Past the bend in a narrow village road, near a sagging boundary wall, the sound came clear even through the water. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't a growl. It was a long, uneven cry, broken off too early each time, like a voice tired of calling but still needing to be heard. The dog was just behind a half-fallen gate, chained to a rusted spike wedged into the wall. Her coat was the color of sand, darkened now by wet. She didn't pace. She didn't pull. She just sat low in the mud, ears drooped, her whole body shivering with the cold that crept up from the ground and stayed there. The chain around her neck was short, barely enough to let her turn. Rainwater ran into her eyes. But she didn't blink it away. The man heard it before he saw her, a low sound, almost part of the wind. He was on foot, shoulders hunched under an old shawl, heading toward the back alleys for shelter when the cry made him stop. He didn't look around like someone curious. He turned his head slowly and then stepped toward the gate. One look was enough. The chain was taut. The dog's ribs showed even beneath the soaked fur. Her legs shook each time she adjusted them. And when she lifted her eyes to him, it wasn't with panic or hope, just dull recognition, as if she'd already used up everything else. The man stood still for a long time. Water dripped from his chin. Behind him, the road remained empty, just rivulets curling around broken bricks and a wind that made every surface sound hollow. When the dog coughed, it broke through the quiet like something final. Not loud, just deep and wet, a sound of something left untreated for too long. He stepped closer, slowly, hands visible, crouching down just out of reach of the chain. She didn't lunge or whimper. She didn't move at all. Her eyes followed him, that was all. Her body stayed pressed to the wall, tail still, breath uneven. One paw was curled unnaturally under the other. Not broken, but cold, stiff. There was no shelter above her, no food in sight. The mud had risen past her haunches. The man glanced at the door of the small house behind her. No movement, windows shuttered. He called out once, not a shout, just a calm, steady voice. "Anyone home?" No answer. A second time. Still nothing. The rain picked up again, harder now, sharp against the tin and brick. The man pulled the shawl tighter and stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes stayed on hers. He knelt again and said quietly, "I see you." It wasn't a promise, just a fact. The dog lowered her head, not in fear, but with the heaviness of an animal that had learned not to expect anything to change. The chain creaked with the movement, pulling against the spike in the wall. She didn't fight it. She didn't test it. The man stood, walked back the way he came, pausing at the edge of the road, then glancing once more over his shoulder. Her outline was barely visible through the sheets of rain. If no one came, she wouldn't last the night. That was not a guess. It was the truth. She was too wet, too cold, too empty. Behind the wall, under the press of weather and silence, the chain stayed still. And the dog cried once more, not loud, just enough to be heard by someone, somewhere, still listening. By morning, the rain had slowed, but not stopped. It hung like a mist across the Indus village, clinging to rooftops and soaking through every thread. The ground had turned to soft sludge, and puddles had deepened into small, cold ponds along the alley edges. Still, the sound was there. Fainter now, ragged. A cry that came not from panic but from a place lower than fear. From ache, from cold, from waiting. The man returned with a black umbrella and a quiet step. His boots sank into the mud as he walked the same path, slower this time. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just sat on the edge of his bed, rain tapping the window, thinking of a creature too tired to run. She was still there. Her body hadn't shifted. Her shape, tucked into the same hollow in the wall, seemed smaller than the night before. Only her eyes moved when he approached. Not wide, not hopeful, just wet, just awake. She blinked slowly through the drizzle, water trailing from her muzzle, clumping the fur around her neck. The chain hadn't loosened. If anything, it looked tighter now, pulling into the skin where rust had left faint red rings. Her chest moved, shallow and slow. He counted each rise. Counted again. The man crouched near the gate, holding the umbrella high enough so it would not touch her, but shielded enough to keep the rain from her face. She didn't lean forward. She didn't even sniff the air. Her breathing had taken all her energy. He reached into his coat, pulled out a soft cloth and laid it just inside the boundary, not close enough to startle, but near enough to catch her scent if she chose. She didn't. Only her paw twitched once, toes curling into mud. Her ears stayed low. He rose and walked to the door of the house again, same as yesterday. 3 quiet knocks. He waited, then 2 more. He called out once, "Hello?" Nothing. The only sound was dripping water and the far-off creak of livestock doors opening down the lane. He glanced at the windows. Closed. Curtains drawn. The kind of silence that wasn't caused by absence, but avoidance. He knocked once more. No answer. He turned and looked back toward her. The dog still hadn't moved. Not an inch. But her eyes hadn't left him. Not since he arrived. Her gaze was not pleading. It was fixed, like something tethered by more than a chain. Something held in place by days, maybe weeks, of learned stillness. He stepped closer, past the gate, just until he could crouch again. She was soaked through, belly caked in mud, a raw patch visible near her hind leg. Her ribs stood out, not as marks of starvation alone, but of time spent bound too tightly to move. The chain itself was old, likely once part of a tether for livestock. It had no clasp, no give, only a rusted twist around the pole and a heavy loop locked near her throat. The man didn't reach for it. Not yet. He placed a small tin dish of water near the cloth, then sat on the far edge of the step, the umbrella resting between them. He didn't speak again. Just sit in the mud and let the space fill with quiet. When the wind pushed harder, she blinked against it. That was all. No bark, no tail movement. But she was awake. She had watched every move. That mattered. If no one answered tomorrow, he would come again. And if no one claimed her by the next night, he would not leave her there a third. If she stayed tied, she would not last the week. That was certain now. The chain wasn't just holding her. It was finishing her. Across the road, a small boy paused, staring, then ran off when the man met his eye. In this village the dog had been seen before, but no one had heard her until she cried, and still she cried. Not loud, not angry, just enough to remind the world that she was still here. The afternoon stretched thin as the man lingered by the gate, the dog's quiet breaths shallow but steady. The sky had cleared to a dull gray. The rain long paused, but the earth still damp beneath their feet. The house behind the dog remained closed, its windows shuttered tight, the door unmoved. No shadow crossed the threshold. No voice answered the faint calls the man made, soft and respectful, meant to reach anyone who might listen. From the narrow lanes nearby, neighbors peeked cautiously from balconies and doorways, their eyes flicking toward the chained dog and the man's quiet presence. Their gazes held questions unspoken, but their silence was heavy. They said nothing. Their stillness hung in the air like a wall no one wanted to climb. The dog shifted slightly, a cough breaking the quiet, a wet, hollow sound that echoed with exhaustion. It wasn't forceful, but fragile, a fragile signal of distress that the man caught immediately. Her ribs moved in quick, shallow bursts, the faint cough lingering like a shadow in the stillness around them. Her body shivered, but not with cold. It was a shiver born of weakness. The man lowered himself beside the gate. careful not to startle her. He reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out his phone and dialing a number he had saved for moments like this. His voice was low and measured when he spoke. "There's a dog here, tied outside that house near the river. She's wet, weak, coughing. The chain is tight. No one's come out." He paused, listening, the lines of his face tightening. "We need to get a vet here as soon as possible. She won't last long if she stays this way." As he spoke, the dog's head lifted slightly, her eyes catching him with a tired clarity. There was no trust yet, only a fragile awareness. The chain scraped softly as she shifted her weight. The man's fingers twitched with the impulse to free her, but he held back. The risk was clear. Sudden movement, or forcing her away, could cause her to panic or injure herself further. Time passed slowly. The man kept watch, his gaze steady on the dog, his phone silent now, waiting for a reply. The neighbors continued to watch, still quiet, as if unwilling to break a fragile truce between the animal and the weathered man who stood beside her. Their presence was invisible but felt a distant pressure, like waiting for a decision that had already been made by others. The dog coughed again, softer this time, and her breathing hitched briefly. The man leaned closer, whispering gently, "You're not alone." His words were not meant to comfort her, but to hold space for the moment, the space between pain and hope, captivity and release. Minutes stretched into an hour. No one came out of the house. No footsteps crossed the threshold. The man remained, unwavering, watching over the dog whose chain bound her not only physically but to a waiting fate. In that stillness, the stakes were clear. If they waited longer, her strength would fade. If no one acted, she would not survive another night alone in the rain-soaked mud. The chain was more than iron. It was a sentence. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the man's phone buzzed quietly. He nodded, grateful for the small sign of movement in a day otherwise filled with silence. He looked down at the dog, now resting her head low again. Eyes half closed but alert enough to feel the promise of rescue approaching. Outside the house, shadows lengthened and neighbors slipped back inside, leaving the man and the dog alone once more. A fragile pair, bound by circumstance, waiting for the next state night had settled over the village near the Indus River, the rain returning in steady sheets that blurred the edges of every shape. The man came back with a local vet, moving carefully through the mud, their footsteps soft on the soaked earth. No one answered the door when they knocked. The windows remained dark and shuttered. The quiet hung heavy, broken only by the faint, tired cries of the dog chained near the gate. The vet carried a small metal toolbox, its weight a quiet promise of help. The man crouched beside the dog and spoke low and steady, his voice carrying no demand but calm assurance. The dog lifted her head slightly, her eyes wary but no longer frightened. Her body was stiff from hours, maybe days, of confinement, but she did not try to pull away. The chain was tight, biting painfully into her neck, rust flakes clinging to damp fur. It had worn deep grooves into the old wood post and was knotted so tightly there was no slack. The vet worked quickly, using a pair of heavy metal cutters to break the iron links. Each snip rang faintly in the quiet night air. The dog made no sudden movement. When the last link fell away, she didn't run or stumble. Instead, she leaned slowly into the man's leg, a fragile gesture of trust after so much neglect. The man placed his hand gently on her head, feeling the heat of her fevered skin through the wet fur. He slipped off his coat and wrapped it carefully around her shivering frame, as the rain continued to fall like soft percussion on the metal gate. The dog rested her muzzle against his thigh, eyes closing briefly but remaining alert to every faint sound. Her breaths came slow and uneven but steady. The vet murmured softly as she examined the dog. There were cuts and abrasions, but no broken bones. Her ribs were sharp beneath the thin coat, and the vet's fingers pressed lightly against her swollen abdomen. noting signs of dehydration and malnutrition. The dog's ears twitched faintly, catching the subtle voices of the rescuers. No owner appeared. No footsteps approached in the night. The quiet neighborhood remained still and watchful. The man stood slowly, supporting the dog as she shifted weight onto him. Together, they began the slow walk away from the gate where she had waited so long. Her steps were unsteady but steady enough. The man's coat was damp and heavy now with rain and warmth, but the dog did not resist. She followed quietly, leaning into his side, her body seeking the smallest comfort after long hours of cold and fear. Every moment carried weight. If she ran now, she might collapse. If they waited, she had a chance. Her future was uncertain, but in this moment, freed from the chain, the first step had been taken. As they moved through the darkened streets, the rain softened to a drizzle. Village lights flickered behind them like distant stars. The dog no longer cried. She walked beside the man, leaning once more against his leg, silent but alive. He whispered softly, "You're safe now." Her eyes met his briefly, tired but present, before closing again as the slow, steady rhythm of their steps carried them onward through the night. Toward freedom. The small kitchen was quiet except for the steady drip of water from the rain-soaked coat the man had wrapped around the dog. He set her down gently on an old blanket laid out near the stove, where the warmth softened the cold that had settled deep into her bones. She curled into herself, a fragile coil of fur and ribs, and settled without protest. Her breathing slowed, even and steady, like a faint pulse that whispered life back into her body. The man moved slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile calm. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and worn linoleum. Outside, the rain still fell softly, pattering against the window pane with a soothing rhythm. The dog's ears twitched occasionally, but her eyes stayed closed, trusting enough to rest, but alert to the sounds that marked safety. Hours passed in silence. When she finally woke, it was with small, slow movements, a stretch of her legs, a blink of her tired eyes. She did not bark or whine, but instead lifted her head to look at the man. Her gaze was steady, unguarded, and quietly curious, as if she was trying to understand what this place was and who this person was who had saved her. The man knelt beside her, his hand reaching out in a slow, deliberate gesture. His voice was low and soft, careful not to startle. "You're safe now." The words hung in the air between them, not a promise, but a quiet truth. She shifted slightly closer, resting her head on his knee. There was no sudden movement or leap of joy, only a delicate acceptance. Her body was still weak, trembling faintly with the effort of being alive, but the tension that had gripped her for so long had begun to ease. Outside, the night deepened. The rain ceased, and a thin breeze whispered through the cracks in the window frame, carrying the scent of earth and distant fields. The stove's glow painted soft shadows across the walls, wrapping the room in a gentle warmth. The man sat quietly, watching her rest. There was no rush to do more, no urgency beyond this moment of fragile healing. Every breath she took was a small victory, every quiet movement a step away from the cold and chains she had known. In the stillness, trust was growing, slow, steady, without words. The dog's eyes closed again, and the man stayed near, a silent guardian in the quiet kitchen. The night stretched on, calm and unbroken, holding them both in its quiet embrace. Outside, the world carried on, but here, in this small room warmed by a stove and softened by care, something new had begun. Days passed slowly in the small house near the Indus, each one marked by quiet moments and careful observation. The dog ate when offered, though never eagerly. Her thin frame stayed curled close to the floor, reluctant to venture far from the warmth of the stove. Her breathing had steadied since the night of rescue, but her eyes held a cautious watchfulness, scanning every sound and shadow with deep wariness. Every creak of the house, every distant footstep outside, sent her slipping beneath the worn table in the kitchen, her body folding into the smallest shape she could manage. There, in the dim space between the legs of the furniture, she was invisible to the world and safe from the noise she did not understand. Her ears flattened, her tail tucked close, and she stayed silent but alert, a ghost of herself in the quiet. The man watched patiently, never rushing or forcing her. He spoke softly when he spoke at all, offering gentle words that seemed meant more for himself than for her. "It's okay," he said once as she cautiously accepted food from his hand. "You're safe here." His presence was steady, a slow promise of care she could not yet trust but might come to know. One morning, just after dawn, the man found her in a different place. She sat upright beside the door, eyes fixed on the small gap beneath it. Her posture was still, but her gaze was sharp, almost expectant. She did not cower or hide. Instead, she waited. The thin morning light cast long shadows across the floor, and the air was cool and still. The man knelt beside her quietly, his breath soft in the calm room. He didn't understand what she waited for, only that she had chosen this place, this threshold, to watch and listen. For hours she remained there, unmoving, her eyes tracking every slight noise from outside. The neighborhood around them was waking slowly. Birds stirred in the trees, a breeze rustled dry leaves against the window, and distant voices drifted faintly in the morning air. But the dog's attention never wavered from the door. The man reached out a gentle hand, resting it lightly on her head. "Waiting for someone," he whispered. There was no answer but the steady pulse of her quiet breathing. The days stretched on with the same rhythms. She ate, rested, and waited. Each step forward was slow and measured, marked more by stillness than movement. Her body had not yet shed the tightness of chains and cold, and her spirit remained tethered to something unseen, a memory, a fear, or a hope. Still she did not bark or growl. She watched and listened, and in that waiting, the man saw a fragile strength growing beneath the surface. He stayed near, learning the language of small gestures and soft silences, carrying the weight of her trust in his steady presence. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the quiet battle unfolding inside a small house by the river. The dog's eyes, once dull and tired, began to hold something new, a cautious curiosity, a spark of connection, and in the corner by the door, she waited. One quiet morning, the man stood by the door, preparing to leave as he had done many times before, but today was different. The dog, who had spent days curled in corners and waiting by thresholds, rose without hesitation and walked beside him. There was no leash, no chain, just the gentle press of her paws on the cool stone floor, moving steadily forward. Her steps were tentative but sure, as if the weight of the past had lessened just enough to allow this small freedom. They reached the gate together. The dog paused, glanced up at the man briefly, then stepped beyond the boundary they had both come to know as a barrier. The morning air was fresh and crisp, carrying the soft sense of earth and distant water. She moved beside him as he walked slowly through the village streets, her eyes alert but calm. She stayed close, her head level with his knee, every movement quiet and measured. At the market, the narrow lanes filled with early shoppers and vendors arranging their goods. People noticed the pair immediately. An unfamiliar dog walking beside a man known for his quiet ways. Fingers pointed, whispers followed them like a shadow. Yet the dog never barked or wavered. She kept her focus on the man's side, her pace steady, her presence calm in the bustle. The man smiled once, a small, knowing curve of his lips that did not call attention but held something private between them. It was a smile born of patience and hope, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come together. The dog did not look back. She did not glance at the faces or hear the whispers. Her trust was placed fully in the man beside her, and in the path unfolding ahead. The village felt different with her there, less burdened by silence, more alive in its shared presence. Yet there was no rush, no sudden leap toward change. Each step was careful, deliberate. The dog's body relaxed slightly, the tension of long captivity easing in every breath and movement. She moved not as a pet forced to follow, but as a companion choosing her way. Side by side, they navigated the narrow streets and market stalls, their connection quiet but unbreakable. The day stretched forward, soft with sunlight and the gentle hum of village life. The dog walked on, no longer chained, no longer waiting, simply present, moving forward. Behind his home, the man dug a small hole in the earth. The soil soft from recent rains but easy enough to break with steady hands. Each handful of dirt fell away slowly, deliberate and quiet, as if the ground itself needed time to accept what was coming. The old chain, rusted and heavy, lay coiled beside him. Once a symbol of confinement, now a burden ready to be laid to rest. The dog sat nearby, her body stretched out on the grass, eyes half closed but watchful. She lifted her head every so often, glancing toward the man as he worked, calm and steady, burying the remnants of a past she no longer carried. Her fur caught the sunlight, dull yet warming, and for the first time in days, she didn't tremble. The sky was clear now, soft blue fading into gold at the edges, a gentle breeze stirring leaves in the trees overhead. The village around them hummed quietly in the distance, but here, in this small patch of earth behind the man's home, time felt suspended. As the last of the soil covered the chain, the man pressed it down lightly with his palm, a silent goodbye to the weight it had held. He rose slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers, and sat beside the dog. She shifted closer, resting her head on his knee, her breaths even and slow. No sound came from her lips, not a cry, not a whimper. There was no bark to break the stillness, only the soft rise and fall of her chest, steady and calm, like the slow tide pulling away from a shore. The man looked out toward the horizon where the sun hung low, casting long shadows and bathing the world in warm light. He felt the quiet settle between them, a peace earned, fragile but real. The dog lay back down fully, stretching into the sun-warmed grass, her eyes closed gently and the corners of her mouth relaxed. She was no longer a creature bound by chains or sorrow. In that moment, beneath the vast sky and with the old chain buried deep beneath the soil, she was simply free. Behind his home, the man began digging a small hole in the soft earth, the soil damp from recent rains but yielding easily to his steady hands. Each handful of dirt he turned over fell away quietly, a slow and deliberate act that felt like closing a chapter. The old chain, once cold and heavy around the dog's neck, lay coiled beside him, rusted, stiff, and now a relic of captivity ready to be laid to rest. The dog sat nearby on the grass. Her body stretched out and relaxed for the first time in weeks. Her eyes were half closed, catching the warm sunlight filtering through the leaves above. She lifted her head occasionally, glancing toward the man as he worked, her gaze calm but alert, as if witnessing the end of something she had long waited to see. Her fur, still dull from neglect, caught the light in soft patches that seemed to carry quiet hope. The sky above was clear now, vast and pale blue with a gentle breeze stirring the branches overhead. The distant sounds of the village hummed faintly, but here in the small yard behind the man's home, time seemed to slow. The air carried the scent of earth and grass, mingling with the faint warmth of the afternoon sun. As the man laid the rusted chain carefully into the hole, he paused, running his fingers over its coarse links one last time. There was no bitterness in his touch, only a quiet respect for what it represented and what it no longer would. With deliberate care, he covered it with soil, pressing the earth down gently as if to tuck the past beneath the ground. When the hole was filled, he sat back on his heels, wiping dirt from his hands. The dog shifted closer to him, resting her head lightly on his knee. Her breathing was even and slow, a soft rhythm that filled the stillness between them. There was no sound from her, no bark, no whimper, no cry, just the peaceful rise and fall of a body finally at ease. The man looked out toward the horizon where the sun cast long shadows across the fields. The golden light stretched wide and warm, wrapping the world in a quiet embrace. He felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders, the closing of a chapter written in silence and sorrow, now ending with a simple act beneath the open sky. The dog lay down fully in the sun-warmed grass, stretching out her legs and closing her eyes. Her body relaxed completely, and the tension that had held her for so long finally released. She was no longer the frightened animal tied to a chain, but a creature resting in freedom, held in the calm of a new beginning. The breeze moved softly through the trees, carrying with it the faint sounds of distant life, the low murmur of villagers going about their day, the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird overhead. The dog's chest rose and fell steadily as she drifted toward sleep, the sunlight warming her coat and the earth beneath her. In this quiet moment, the man and the dog shared something wordless but profound, a trust built slowly through time and care, a bond forged in patience and quiet courage. The chain, buried beneath the soil, was no longer a mark of suffering, but a symbol of release. She did not cry anymore. She lay in the sun, still and free.